That's
where there's a little bit delay.
So you're talking about integrating.
Another giant microphone.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's bigger than me. There you go. Yeah. Are we ready to begin? All righty. Good evening, everybody. I would happy day before Memorial Day weekend launches. So thank you so much for giving up your Thursday evening to come here. Once every 10 years, district maps throughout Illinois are adjusted and redrawn. And before I go any further, I forgot to introduce myself, so forgive me. I'm Corinne Pirog, and I'm the Kane County Board Chair. The Kane County Reapportionment Committee, which is comprised of a bipartisan selection of elected board members and community leaders, have met 2 times to start taking a look at redrawing the maps that you see here. Are there any elected board members or other elected officials here today that could stand up and introduce yourself?
Hi, everybody. I'm Cheryl Strathman. I'm Kane County Board Member for District 20, which is Elgin, from the Cook County boundary on the north side of Elgin, east side, across the river to the west side.
Okay, wonderful.
I'm already standing on this side. Excuse me, Chris Caius. I'm in District 23, which is the northern part of the county here, which is Algonquin and Carpentersville.
Very good.
I'm Ken Shepro. I'm from District 12, which is the east side of St. Charles and the village of Wayne, and a large unincorporated swath that I'm currently also the vice chair of the board.
And I think there was somebody else who raised their hand, the lady with the blue shirt on. Okay, just taking notes. Welcome. Thank you for being here.
Rather elected.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
I might be on connected before. I'm the Dundee Township Assessor.
Oh, Mike, nice to meet you.
I'm also the chairman of local Dundee Township Republican organization.
Okay, very good. I'm glad you're here. Welcome. Well, as you may have read in the newspapers, the Reapportionment Committee is carefully reviewing the population growth that is occurring in northern Kane County, as well as the growing richnesses of our minority populations. Now, if you haven't had a chance, after the meeting, they'll be up for a while. And I'm going to take the microphone. I'd like to share with you pretty quickly just what our three maps are. So this is the 2011 map, and this map and this map are exactly the same. This is the 2020, 2011, and we are redrawing the maps, obviously, to go forward in 21, and those maps will be drawn soon. This map, I want to call your attention to the population. So if you take a look, this is probably one of our highest growth populations, is County Board 9. And it's along the I-90 corridor. That came in at 21,900. And that was in 2010, using US Census data. The best estimate we have now using the American Community Survey data for this district is 30,013. So that's about a 7,000 people growth. And in one of the precincts, Rutland 2, there are 7,500 people in a precinct that should have about anywhere from 500 to 800 people for a precinct. So it's a large, substantial growth that's going on in there. And in this area here, they are predicting that there's going to be a 43% growth along the I-90 corridor by 2050. So Kane County is on the verge of really having a growth in population, which is something we're sensitive to as we start working with the maps. Looks like we may have a couple other people. Hi, welcome. Now, this map that's all in yellow is called the MALDEF map. And this again was based on 2010 census data. The MALDEF map stands for Mexican American Latin Defense and Education Fund. And what this map simply does, it's a baseline so that we can take a look at back in 2010 using the census data, where our hotspots are for minority populations. And you can see they are primarily along the eastern side of Kane County, along as we call the river cities. This is something we're going to be addressing as we go further into taking a look at the new map for 2020. And what I'd like you to take a look at when you have time and if you have interest is we're up here in this corridor up here in the northeast corridor. The districts as they're drawn in this map are pretty much the same as they are here. So that population has been pretty stable. It has shown some significant growth, but nothing extraordinary. There will be some differences in the Elgin area between this map and in the Aurora area. So when we start drawing, we're going to be taking a look at not only population, but on the Voting Rights Act. And we'll be talking a little bit about Zach, who is our consultant with the maps. We'll talk to you a little bit more about that in a little bit. As part of the county's map drawing process and statutory requirements, we are required to present the map to the public for your comments before a final vote is taken. And that final vote for the maps will be taken in July. It'll be a provisional map, but again, we'll talk more about what the provisional map is going to be looking like as well as we go through our discussion. But your voice and your concerns and your needs are very important to us now as we start doing the draft of the map. So any concerns or thoughts you may have, we welcome hearing those because we're still very much in the preliminary process of drawing maps. So please, the comments are most welcomed. Before we begin this listening session, we are going to show you the current map, talk a little bit about the process of drawing maps, and ask for your help in participating in a poll. I look forward to hearing, as we all do, all the board members who are here, your comments and your thoughts. And I would like to now turn the meeting over to Zach Kautsky, and he's going to talk a little bit about the map drawing process.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good evening. As the chair said, my name is Zach Kautsky, and we've been hired along with my colleague Josina Marita by the county board here to help with the redistricting process. And so what we're going to do is walk through kind of how that begins and the process by which we will engage upon here with the board members and the task force. So as the chair has pointed out, again, highlighted up here and then zoomed into, we are taking, consideration of the map that is still in place from 2011 based on 2010 census data and the projection out then utilizing 2015 to 2019 American Community Survey data, which is not the 2020 official census, but is awfully close to it, the population growth and trends. And when looking at that, we're taking a look then tonight at the northeast portion of the district there, or of the county here, where we have seen some considerable growth. There has been writ large around 16,000 population growth over the last 10 years here in Kane County. You can see here that thank you, I was just gonna ask for that. The way that we're identifying a couple of these districts for your consideration out of the 24 here in Kane County, yellow are majority minority. And when we're referring to minority populations in Kane County, while it is an incredibly diverse county, for the purposes of the Voting Rights Act consideration, they are, that community is going to be almost referring to the Latino community here in Kane County. And I can get to that in a second as to why. So those yellow districts there from the 2010 and then 2011 maps are the districts that are highlighted that are majority minority. And again, you'll see are majority Latino in that. The red districts there, or the red lines there, are the districts by which we have seen growth in that as well in the last couple of years. So those are the ones that were the most populated districts in that. In 2010, and then again in the maps in 2011, the ideal size of a district population was 21,500. And then based on population growth, we're going to have to increase those lines, those populations in those boundaries by around 700 votes due to the population growth overall in the county. There is some consideration here just to keep in mind, why are we having to change the lines when it's only 700 people. The board itself is staying at 24 districts. And so that's actually different than the situation that we're at in the state level here, where based on national census and reapportionment numbers, Illinois is losing a census or a congressional district. We're not losing districts here, we're maintaining those. So therefore then the populations have to be readjusted and equalized then within the 24 districts here. So it's a difference of approach because we're not losing any districts and therefore, populations are growing exponentially. Here, it's just shifting lines to make everyone equal again due to that population growth. Again, the demographics there, are referring really to the Latino majority districts. And the reason that we're focusing on Latino majority districts is for the purpose of the Voting Rights Act consideration, we first have to consider where there are communities of interest, and that's referring to any minority population, that would be able to hit certain percentages of the voting age population within a district to then presumably be able to have the ability to elect someone from their community to represent them in that. And in King County, again, referring to VRA, I was going to call it VAP, the VRA considerations for Latinos, that is 65%, around 65% of any given district for the voting age population. Now, what is a voting age population? That is legal citizens that could register. They don't have to be registered, but they could register. So 18 years old or more that comprise that percentage of that district. So for Latinos, that's why we have to consider about 65%. For Black African-American districts, it's a lower percentage. It's around 55%. Why the differential? Well, in the Latino community, there's citizenship considerations. Not everyone that is in that community is eligible to register to vote and therefore participate with their enfranchisement. In the Black community, that is not the case. So you immediately have a differential there. Additionally, the Latino community, particularly here in Illinois, is typically much younger than the population as a whole. So therefore, the percentage of the district may be even more overall Latino, but the voting age population, you have to work a little harder to get to that consideration. So again, the yellow lines here, just even in the 2010 map, are the ones that are comprised of majority Latino on that end, and you'll see the three here highlighted, which are in the northeast portion of the county. Thank you, Roger. I assumed that, but thank you for the nod to confirm it, are the ones that are highlighted up here in the northeast portion. Again, using 2015 to 2019 American Community Survey data, which is a census program. It's an ongoing, as you can tell, 4-year kind of survey of about 3 million households, which historically actually ends up being incredibly accurate to the final numbers that will be released from the bicentennial census. In this case, this year, that should have been this spring, but now will be pushed until the fall. We see the population growth and the trends on that. So again, here, the county itself grew just by over 15,000. You're now 532,000. And that means that the district number itself for ideal population is now not 21,500, is now just over 22,100 would be the ideal aggregate number per the 24 districts. And again, Latino majority districts are there highlighted in yellow. The bottom 17, 20, and 24 are the ones in the northeast portion of the county here. And then the ones with the largest population are the ones in the red on that. So those are the ones that absolutely need to be redrawn because they're going to be way overpopulated for our new district considerations. Next one there. Again, referring to the yellow map here, the MALDEF map, I do want to correct the chair on this. It's the MALDEF stands for the Mexican American Legal Defense and Education Fund on that end. That's a civil rights organization that gets deeply involved in redistricting. You can assume by the name, really focuses on ensuring that the Latino communities in states and in municipalities and jurisdictions across the country have their rights protected under VRA Section 2, which again requires where and when you can, you must draw a district that would meet those qualifications for that community to be able to elect through a majority of the population, presumably a member of their own. So that shows up here. Red for that consideration are census tracts that are 70% more Latino. And that, so again, you can see the clustering of that up here in the northeast portion and then overall in the county and the southeast portion down in the rural area. No surprise for those of you that know the areas on that. Next one. A couple things that are also being taken into consideration while drawing the map. One, in Illinois, you can consider incumbent member addresses. So you'll see on the map here, these little dots, these blue and red dots are addresses, placements of where the incumbent board members reside. And you can take that into consideration when drawing maps going forward, particularly in this case, because we're not reducing or increasing the number of districts. You can, take that into consideration. You can also take into consideration if an incumbent board member is retiring or, may be resigning or anything like that as well, or it would be an open district in that regard. Also, the integrity of various political boundaries, most notably precincts. The state really strongly encourages for precincts not to be divided when drawing maps on that. So you're not going to see split precincts as often as possible. You're also going to try and look at other political boundaries and try and maintain some integrity within that. And how these lines come together. So most notably for consideration here would be municipal boundaries on that. Obviously, when you have larger populations, city of Elgin, city of Aurora, but certainly some of these other suburban and more bedroom communities that have seen growth, it's tough knowing that your overall district population needs to be around 22,000 to maintain a municipal boundary, because that town would be far too large for any one district to contain it. So you're going to have multiple districts within municipal boundaries on that. And then again, just to reiterate, first and foremost, and this is the analogy, I'm just going with it now because it's the third time we've said it, for Voting Rights Act consideration, think of it as kind of throwing a pebble into a pond. That first concentric circle is going to be the most dense and most strong, and that it's the first one, and then as those ripples go out, they kind of dissipate, but they get larger. For VRA consideration in Kane County, it is by and large in urban areas, in the cities, along the eastern, but particularly the northeastern and southeastern part of the county, where we have to maintain that consideration for Voting Rights Act Section 2 of where and when you can, you draw a district that is comprised of 65% Latino voting age population and 55% African-American voting age population. You've seen the numbers here. That is almost always going to be a consideration for Latino voting age population districts. We're looking right now at about 8 of those in Kane County. Those will be the first ones that have to be drawn because that's kind of your basis of any map. And then the districts and the apportionment of the population therein are brought in after that on that. There is going to be, ample opportunity for public engagement. This is part of the reason that there's 5 of these board meetings being held throughout the county and in different communities, is to help inform the task force and then the overall board membership so that they can see and gather the public input that their constituents are providing alongside the map recommendations that will be presented to them for consideration. So there was, just one second, sir. There was materials handed out. We'll also keep this up here. These are not hard and fast if you're going to come up and offer testimony, questions or identifications that you have to make. We just think they're kind of generally good opportunities for you to consider presenting who you are and who you're presenting on behalf of, what you would like to see considered by your elected officials when they're taking into consideration these maps. So and there was one question. Do you want me to answer? Oh, all right. We'll go ahead.
I'm kind of new to the process on this, and I was trying to pay attention. So if you have a precinct that now the demographics have shifted so that they're 65 or 55, what happens to those specifically?
Sure. So a precinct, nothing. It's where that precinct itself, in combination with other precincts, can formulate a district that is going to elect an individual. And a precinct wouldn't be of consideration because for election purposes, you can elect a Democrat and a Republican no matter what out of that to represent whoever in that precinct. It's the precincts in the aggregate that combine to form a county board district that is meeting that qualification because that's your duly elected representative to the legislative body. And so those districts, when they can, where and when they can be 65% or 55% for Voting Rights Act consideration have to be considered and drawn.
Try and cluster those together to get to the 65.
Yeah, so long as that is also equaling that standard population, which right now per district would be around 22,100, give or take. Oh, that was one other thing I neglected to mention. There's variance in the size of the districts themselves and the population of the districts. Mr. Shepard will check me on this. There is a standard that is from legal precedent and court decisions here that variance, meaning a differential of that standard population in Illinois and frankly nationally, can be 5% plus or 5% below that, again, average size of every district. So some, at the end of the day, may be larger than that 22,138 or 68, I think, and some may be below that, but that's okay. That in and of itself is not a problem with the legality of that map. That is an allowance on either side that one can bring into it. Okay, yeah, thank you. That's a good clarification on the precinct, so.
If I can mention one more thing. Most of the other counties, as they start doing this redistricting, really like to get to a 1 to 2% variance. So they try to make it tighter, so you don't have that large 5% gap.
Right. Yeah, it's a 10% variance that you can have if you go above or below, depending on the district, and that's absolutely right. It's not a hard and fast, you can take that. It's, you try and, adhere to as equal, we're abiding by the principle, one person, one vote. Oftentimes people would think if you have more people in one district, therefore the representation is more powerful. Well, when you're electing a singular member of that legislative body, they're actually being disenfranchised on that because they don't have more power, even though there's more of them in that. And therefore a district with fewer people still have equal representation on that legislative body. So the chair is absolutely correct. You're not trying to hit 5% one way or another, but you're allowed to go 5% one way or another. I guess we're taking questions on Mr. Shepard.
Just a further comment, Cliff. The 5% is kind of a maximum, and as Zach, I think, implied, that's if there are no other factors. So for example,
Right.
a redistricting plan that all of the minority districts are +5 and everything else is -5 got thrown out.
Right, problematic.
You can't manipulate that number that has some other impact. And often it comes down to each individual case, what other factors they think are at work.
Yep, that's absolutely right.
Which is why I think Madam Chair says the idea is to be far enough below that you're not arguing these little nuances at the fringes.
Yep. But those are kind of your guardrails. Think of it that way, right? We can do bumper cars. You can't go beyond that or one way or another. All right. Thank you all so much for being out here on a cold, kind of rainy night.
All right. Hello, my name is Franklin Ramirez, and this is the audience participation section of tonight's town hall.
Did we jump the gun on you? Sorry.
No, it's okay. Questions are always fun no matter what. But most of you, if not all, I know some of you don't, and that's okay, have a smartphone. So not everybody wants to come up to a microphone and give their presentation or testimony in front of everybody. So you can do it from the comfort of your chair. If you see the web address above, it's pollev.com/Kane County. There's just a simple 8-question survey, if you will. All of those answers are anonymous, and they will be given to the task force. Will be aggregated and give it to the task force and the county board to help them with their decisions, but to also summarize these town halls as well. So you're welcome to not only do that and give your oral testimony or one or the other. It's completely up to you. So with that being said, you will see these screens bounce back and forth. I know we kept the answers from last night just to kind of give you a sense of what it is. It's live action, so when you enter in your information, it changes on the screen. Besides that, though, we are welcome your oral comments. I have a microphone. I'm happy to go to you. Or if you'd like to come up here and talk to everybody in this way, you're more than welcome as well. So who would like to go first?
Let's just dive in.
There you go. Do you want the microphone or do you want to come up here?
I will come right up there.
I kind of, when I saw that come in, I figured as much. So we'd love to see you up here.
So this is just a quick, I don't know how many I have. That's how. And this is just Cliff's version of a quick breakdown for north of Elgin, if you will. And we truly appreciate everybody's input on this, but my simpleton understanding is that if I take the population, or what was the population, divided by 24, we're coming up with 22,167 per district. Hypothetically, that would be ideal in a perfect world. Acceptable deviations, I think we're within there. But as we look at the areas, it's been suggested that there's two hot spots that we have. One is in Aurora with a Hispanic population that we have some tight confines there. And the other one, at least in our area, for Chris, Jared, myself, and Tom Popey, is Pingree Grove. And for any of us in this area, we know Pingree Grove didn't exist in the last census. It was a cornfield. So now that it's a bunch of homes, now that they're being counted, you can see that Tom Popey's district, they're not within tolerance, it's exploded. He's got 8,000 people more than anybody else does. It's not Tom's fault. It's not, I mean, it just, those homes weren't there. It was a cornfield. So when some people look and say, we don't want to upset the map, we don't want to twist this, we don't have a choice. There's more people than should be there, and there's going to be an adjustment. Why? Because the map doesn't lie. We have to do it. It's that simple. How does that get done? There are people smarter than me that are going to try and do that, and I appreciate everything that you're going to do. But I just want everybody, at least from my perspective, these aren't political, they're numbers. There's the map. We have to do something about it to fall into legislative compliance. And that's what we're trying to do, and that's where we're going. Karina, am I off target or not? You've heard me say this before, and I just made it pretty this time. That's all. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Cliff.
Thank you.
Maybe you want to introduce yourself?
My name is Cliff Surgis. I am District 21, County Board Member for I serve Gilbert's, Sleepy, West, and East Dundee, a very small sliver of Carpentersville. I live at the extreme west end of my district. I work at the extreme east end of my district. So I travel Route 72 all day long. I am positioned for my community. It has been a pleasure to serve my community, but there's going to be changes, and we can't get them buckle in and see where these go. So.
Excellent. Thank you. Who else would like to speak? I'm coming to you.
Hello, I'm Mary Roberti. I live in Elgin. I'm in Cheryl Strathman's district, and I just have a couple of questions. I know, and I have not studied the Voting Rights Act, Section 2, but are there other criteria besides just the demographics in terms of what we look at, like I think in terms of education, home ownership, median income? Do we look at other criteria besides being whether we're Latinx or whether we're African American? Can you explain that to me?
So explicit and a very valid question. What is a community of interest, right? You could, last night we were out in Elburn, and certainly the rural parts of the county would claim they're a community of interest, right, on that. But that doesn't rise to the consideration, unfortunately, or, it just doesn't rise to the consideration for the Voting Rights Act, which was explicitly drawn up to ensure that minority communities cannot be packed or fracked to dilute their ability to elect a member of their community to a position of government on that. And that is the consideration that VRA will always take, is that, and it's kind of unusual, right? Because we're, conditioned not to really think in explicitly racial terms in the lens of government programming or, just society writ large. But for redistricting, you're compelled to, because if you don't, that would then bring a fairly strong challenge that in not doing that and not taking that into consideration and drawing those districts where and when you can, you are disenfranchising that community that has standing under a federal law that the state also takes into consideration and would be tossed out. So explicitly there, you are drawing by race. Has nothing to do with education, nothing to do with a homeowner versus a renter, has nothing to do with anything other than an individual, their racial makeup, and then again, the voting age population, and does that compile enough in that district to meet those kind of parameters of 65 and 55. Yeah, exactly. That's a good clarification, Chair. I used a terminology to say packing or fracking. So Mr. Shepro brought up an example earlier that if we were to draw certain districts, that those specific districts all had that maximum allowance of 5% more in population, and all the other districts didn't, you are packing populations into that, and presumably, again, under the principle of one person, one vote, diluting their power to potentially affect other districts where they could meet population consideration for political power. And fracking is the exact opposite of that, where you are, rather than having one condensed district, in this case, let's say 65% Latino, and all of a sudden that core that could be 65% Latino and therefore a district is now cut into 3 or 4 districts. That's fracking. You are fracturing that potential power, political power that community could exercise. So packing and fracking, 2 different approaches to diluting, in this consideration, the Voting Rights Act's political opportunity. I think she still had a question, so yeah.
Follow up here,
Sure.
and that is when you're asking about, community, what exactly, how do you describe that? When you say, what is my community?
You tell us. Are you an Elginite, or is that what they call Elgin?
But
Sure.
what difference does it make if we're just following the Voting Rights Act, Section 2?
Well, that is the main consideration, but like I mentioned, otherwise, we're also taking into consideration municipal boundaries, other political entities, and that you're certainly taking into consideration as well incumbent, where they are currently serving that community, and you're not going to try and disenfranchise that community's chosen candidate here and now for future districts considerations on that. But, a community can be a community of any consideration. For the purpose of the VRA, again, when we were out in Elburn last night, that's a community. The western half of the county that has 4 districts right now, the rural agrarian nature of that is a community that absolutely can and should be brought into consideration for how those district boundaries are drawn and the influence that those duly elected representatives have within government on that. And that is something that may not rise to the protection and legal requirements that the VRA does, but still is absolutely valid for your elected officials to hear and to consider how and when then those lines are drawn to represent that community. So a community can be however you define it. And that's what we're here to hear tonight.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Not like Elgin, not like a big,
Yeah. Here.
A larger city like Elgin and Aurora, obviously, because of population density, is divided up with, you can see many representatives. And you can see the western part of it has fewer representatives. But if you are a mid-sized city here in Kane County of approximately 30,000, 20 to 30,000 people, there have been previous reiterations of these maps where you may have 2, 3 people represented that one city. So Mayor has asked for consideration that when we start doing those district boundaries, that we don't divide it up into multiples, that we try to contain it so that one representative can be representing that community. So that's a community. Can you imagine Del Webb, which is not too far from here, having 4 or 5 representatives? It would dilute that community of which they feel is their community. So that's also to be considered community, which is the input that we are seeking from all of you representatives here from different areas, saying this is very special to us because of. And as we go through the map drawing process, it's not guaranteed by the Voting Rights Act, Section 2 with minority populations, but it's sensitive to us so we know what your needs are. And that's something we can only hear with your voice.
Thank you. So MALDEF is not something that I, for one, am familiar with. Is the group like a state sanctioned, this is the governing body, is that why we're looking at that map? Or are there competitive minority maps then, I mean, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
They're sanctioned by Major League Baseball, so here's,
Well, as a Sox fan, I would still, take issue who are sanctioning in that regard, but.
Go Cubs.
Yeah. No, so MALDEF, again, the acronym stands for Mexican American Legal Defense and Education Fund. The name implies they are there to be a citizen rights organization on behalf of the Latino community. Same as a NAACP would be for the Black community, Asian Americans for Advancing Justice, here in Illinois for the Asian community, on down the line, right? These are the reason that the MALDEF map was presented, and I know those from the county can certainly get into even greater detail on it, is these are the type of players that engage as an outside third-party entity to look at how maps are being drawn. In some cases, will actually present some of their own, as they did 10 years ago, which you can see, the lines of it, in some cases, match up really well, and others don't, right? But that was what that civil rights organization was saying. If we were to take into consideration how they view their interpretation of the ability of the population as the census laid out could be, it would have to be these districts for the maximum potential of their communities or those VRA Section 2 communities to maximize their potential for elected government's ability to represent themselves here. So they and others are deeply involved in reviewing, particularly where the minority populations are. It's not like they're going to go look at, a super small rural, downstate community that, 98% white, which Illinois has many of. They're going to look at the ones where those populations that they are advocating for could or could not be potentially disenfranchised. So they absolutely, and they've been in contact with legal representation that the board has already engaged upon, just as they have at the state, for the state and the federal maps, in judicial, I should say. Yep.
Ken Shepro, Vice Chair, King County Board. A couple of comments. First, Cliff, the MALDEF map, first, it shows that they wanted 9 minority districts, but the numbers didn't justify it. The Kane County Board never considered this map 10 years ago. I am told that a board member commissioned it, but having been deeply involved as the board's attorney during that process, we never saw it. I was hoping we'd get a correction about the accuracy of the ACS, the American Community Survey data, which was again tonight described as incredibly accurate. Our lawyer that we've hired has told us that it is actually has a reputation for being incredibly inaccurate in many respects, that while sometimes it's right, sometimes when they did a study of the 2010 estimate versus the 2010 data, our lawyer pointed out that there was a variance as much as 20% in the population count. So that is and interestingly enough, virtually all, again, this is what he told us, virtually all of the, what I would call the minority groups, organizations like MALDEF, like the NAACP, Common Cause, et cetera, the list is, I think, like over a dozen, have all taken the position that if anybody uses the American Community Survey data as a basis for drawing a map, they will sue because they believe it actually is inaccurate. And if you think about it, it's got to be inaccurate because it's not current. It is actually a rolling average going as far back as 2015 and estimates at that of what they think it is. And if you try to do a 4-year rolling average, you're not going to get the current number. So that's the problem with that.
Mr. Sherrill, could I just interject? Yeah. This is on, all right. You used a phrase there that I just want to make sure we clarify on, in that the estimates, the projections that the census offers is off and was significantly off. I think we all saw for years, Illinois was being told we were going to lose 250,000 people based on census estimates. When they put out, time is a flat circle right now, I think earlier this month or late in April, the actual reapportionment numbers nationally, Illinois only lost 18,000 people as opposed to the prior estimate of 250,000. The American Community Survey data from 2015 to 2019 hewed far closer to the 18,000 reapportionment numbers than it did anywhere near the 250,000 projection that Illinois was set to lose, that the census itself still offered at one point. So the estimate and the survey are two different things. And it is not the only basis by which this map would be considered, but because we don't have 2020 census data yet in hand, and we won't until September, you have to take into data consideration 2010, and then using that to help show where projection of growth was and who that growth was, the 2015 and 2019. And then I think the chair can speak to what the provisional passage and then the relook at when we get the new data or the official data in September. But I just want to make sure for clarification purposes, estimate and the ACS are two different things as provided by the census on that. So just
to sort of further clarify, the problem is that the larger the sample, like the whole state, the more likely the overall estimate is going to be more accurate because all of these smaller errors will cancel each other out. So when you went to the census tract level and looked at it, those areas were far more divergent in up or down compared to the estimates than was the total. And the problem is we have to do this based on smaller jurisdictions, census tracts, block data, et cetera. We can't just look at even a county-wide figure and say, well, it wasn't that far off. And to that point, I wanted to comment, you mentioned, I think, yesterday and tonight, that the average population difference of all these new extra people is about 700 per district. The trouble is, like the 12,000 people in Tom Copey's district, we can't take 700 of them at a time and distribute them out to the other 23 districts. That's a large block that has to go somewhere. And that's obviously one of the things that the board is going to have to deal with. But I wanted, if you would allow me to make a few comments. I had the advantage of actually being born when the Voting Rights Act was passed, and I'm guessing not everybody in the room had that.
Did they have TVs then?
Yeah, but they were like, you know, black and white, and they were all made in America, like Magnavox and things like that, right? Philips, yes. Voting Rights Act was originally passed by Congress and proposed by President Johnson as a remedy for the systematic disenfranchisement of the Southern African American community. And it was actually set to expire, got renewed. Actually, I had up here Section 2 of the Act, which the point being, though, is that the provisions of that act, which were designed to, oh, it actually popped up here. I'll just read a page. This is from the Department of Justice's website. Section 2 of the Voting Rights of 1965 prohibits voting practices or procedures that discriminate on the basis of race, color, or membership in one of the language minority groups identified in Section 4F2 of the Act. Most of the cases arising under Section 2 since its enactment involved challenges to at-large election systems, which were believed to be intended to, you know, if you elect everybody at large, the minority is not going to have a chance to elect its people. That's changed over time. And one of the interesting anomalies is that Elgin, I believe, still elects its city council at large. And you would think that would be suspect under the Voting Rights Act. But because apparently there have been minorities elected, it's been deemed that that's okay. But I guess what I'm saying is that back to the question about the community of interest, I mean, the sad fact is that there are a long list of criteria, but if you are not a protected class under the Voting Rights Act, all of those other factors sink to the bottom. And so, for example, community of interest, even municipal boundaries. If you read up on this, you will see that it says that the districts, any district is supposed to be compact and contiguous. And let's not even talk about Illinois. If you've ever looked at a congressional map of North Carolina, which the Republicans drew, you've got districts that start at the East Coast, go down a highway for about 200 miles, and that was supposed to be a congressional district. Well, yes, you do. So I just want to say one last thing about the MALDEF map. It's 11 years old. It wasn't used. I don't think we care what it showed 10 years ago. We care about what the population is today. You don't get bonus points for percentage growth. You get representation based on today's figures. And that's all I have to say.
And then I'd love to have a couple more questions, but just the MALDEF map. What I think is interesting about this and why I think it's important and why I think we should display it is as you look here and here, you see estimate population. This is pretty pure. This is truly an estimate because we don't have the accurate census data. And we can all agree upon that. But the colors don't represent the community. We don't see ethnicity on this. Here, you are able to get even though the data is 10 years old, here we're able to get an idea, a conceptual idea of where the ethnicity lies. You can see it here, we can see it here, we can see it here. And so we know that these are, it was referred to before as hotspots for the voting rights districts, large growth minority districts, all Caucasian through here primarily. So this is what I think is so fascinating about this map, is that it has a demographic pictorial for people rather than taking a look at this, which is lovely shades of blue and green and yellow. So I think that this is, when we start talking about it, it gives you a visual image of some of the districts, the voting rights districts that we're referring to.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that the Voting Rights Act, Steve Briesowitz, I'm from St. Charles. The Voting Rights Act was passed, there was not just discrimination in the southern United States, there was discrimination in New York, in the Midwest, everywhere that was affected by the Voting Rights Act. I wanted to correct that. And I also wanted to point out that to me, community of interest is also economic interest. St. Charles is currently broken up into 3 different county board districts, and the southern part of St. Charles tends to be older, small single-family house, medium size houses, and then you got Crane Road Estates where they had the $1 Million Home Show 15 years ago, and their economic interests are extremely diverse. And I think that's important to me.
Excellent, thank you. Anyone else that would like to say anything this evening? Well, again, thank you for your input. Zach will sit there and tell us what's happening next, and then we'll have a closing statement. But again, the pollev.com/King County. There are 8 questions, and you'll have to press next or something to proceed. So again, thank you for participating that way as well.
So we've got 2 more of these to go. You see here on the 2nd and then on the 9th. One will be virtual. That'll be the next one. And then the 5th and final will be out in Hampshire. I'm excited because I used to go out there to the big nursery and pick out plants. And now, 11 years later, I'm out there talking about redistricting. So funny where life takes you. But anyway, we've got 2 more of those. All of these have been recorded and transcriptions there and notes have been taken. Thank you to the staff for that. This will then be compiled, obviously board members as it goes along, those that are in attendance and those that wish to log on and see it can and will. We would encourage anyone of your colleagues to please promote these forthcoming 2 more meetings, because that will be brought back to the task force. The consultants will also be able to see these, and then that will help inform then the map that is ultimately presented for consideration. I think Chair might have a couple dates in mind that she would like to mention, but this is the public gathering process. Again, the demographic and population data has begun to be analyzed and brought into the systems by which the maps themselves will ultimately be developed on. So thank you so much for letting me join you here tonight, and Chair, I'll let you close it out.
So this evening we talked about a lot. We talked about population, we talked about growth, we talked about lines, and we talked about what kind of data we are using. As you are aware, the U.S. Census data has been delayed, and the soonest that we're going to be able to get it in a format that experts can take a look at it and not the average person will be in August, mid-August. The general public will be able to receive the data in an understandable format. We do believe sometime September, late September. So we're hoping to be able to actually have a final map drawn by the end of September. But in the meanwhile, we are under statutory restrictions that say that the county has to have a map drawn and approved by the county board by July 13th, which is the date we're moving towards. This will be a provisional map because we do not have the accurate census data. So that will then be tweaked later on in September when we're able to actually take a look at it and refine this. So this will be at least an opportunity for us to really get as close understanding as we possibly can to be able to draw an appropriate map. The county is under restrictions that the state of Illinois has not done. You've seen that the state map, both representative and Senate districts have already been drawn. They are not under the same restrictions that the county is. The state says that they can use the best available data allowed by the census, which in this case is the ACS data. The board did take a consensus vote to say that we could, our board, could use the ACS data for the use of planning out these maps. We are controlled by statute, saying that we have got to use decennial data, which is the 2020 census data, which we don't have and won't be available until September. So we have to do something to make sure that we meet our statutory guidelines and goals to have a map approved by July 13th. That is why we're moving forward with this data, working as closely as we can with demographers to draw accurate maps. On behalf of the Kane County Board and its task force, I would like to thank you again for your comments, your concerns, and giving a part of your evening to share your thoughts. As I mentioned before, a provisional map will be brought forward to the board on July 13th for their consensus. There will be before that one more opportunity for the public to come to make comment on this provisional map. So if you haven't, it'll be a public meeting. You'll be welcome to come to have your final comments, and we will review them. And then once again, the map then will be tweaked if appropriate, if there's concerns that are presented before the July 13th deadline. If you have any other additional comments, please feel free to reach out to us. When I truly mean we look forward to having those comments, we are sincere, the task force is sincere. This is a map that all of you have to live with for the next 10 years. So we want to make sure it truly represents your interests and your needs. So in the meanwhile, have a great evening, have a wonderful Memorial Day weekend, and stay safe. And thank you again for coming.